Hey there, travelers. Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment below telling us where you're tuning in from. Now let's begin our journey into the unknown. I woke up not knowing where I was. The ceiling tiles were white. Acoustic panels with tiny holes, stained yellow in the corners. I counted them. 12 across, 8 down. Trying to anchor myself to something real while my heart hammered against my ribs. Hospital. The smell gave it away. That sterile chemical odor mixed with something underneath it. Something organic and rotten that no amount of bleach could hide. The smell of people dying slowly. My name is Stuart Redford, 56 years old, ex-Special Forces, brain cancer, stage 4, inoperable. I had to repeat these facts to myself 3 times before they stuck. The tumor was already stealing pieces of me, erasing memories like someone dragging an eraser across a chalkboard. Some mornings I woke up and didn't remember my own address. Other times I'd forget I was sick at all, just for a moment, before the reality came crashing back. This wasn't the first hospital, it was the 5th. The first oncologist in Seattle had been optimistic. "We caught it early," he'd said, which turned out to be a lie. The second doctor in Portland was more honest, but still hopeful. Radiation, chemotherapy, experimental treatments. The third doctor didn't make eye contact when he delivered the news. The fourth doctor, a specialist flown in from Johns Hopkins, spent 20 minutes reviewing my scans before saying the word nobody wants to hear: inoperable. The fifth doctor, the one here at the VA hospital, didn't bother with hope. He was a tired man in his 60s with gray stubble and the defeated posture of someone who delivered too much bad news. 3 months, he'd said. Maybe 4 if you're stubborn. The tumor's wrapped around your brainstem and pushing into critical areas. Surgery would kill you faster than the cancer. We can manage the pain, but that's all we can do now. He'd paused, probably waiting for me to break down. When I didn't, he cleared his throat and said the thing doctors always say: "Go home, Mr. Redford. Be with your family. Make peace with the people you love." I'd wanted to laugh. What family? What people? Instead, I just nodded and asked about the prescriptions. The apartment was exactly how I'd left it 3 weeks earlier. Small, dim, suffocating. 1 bedroom, kitchenette, bathroom with a shower that never got hot enough. The kind of place you rent when you've given up on ever owning anything permanent. I set the pharmacy bag on the counter. 4 bottles. Oxycodone for the pain. Anti-seizure medication. Something for nausea. Something else I couldn't pronounce. The pharmacist had explained the dosages twice, but I'd already forgotten half of it. The silence pressed against my eardrums. No TV, no radio, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rattle of pipes in the walls. 23 years in the military, 4 tours overseas, decorations, commendations, a career that took me to 17 different countries. And this was what I had to show for it: a rented box that smelled like old carpet and regret. I'd been home from the hospital for 2 hours when I remembered the chest. It sat in the corner of my bedroom, half hidden behind a stack of cardboard boxes I'd never unpacked. Military footlocker, olive drab, scratched and dented from being hauled around the world. I hadn't opened it in years, hadn't wanted to. But now, with my mind starting to fracture, I felt this urgent need to remember things before they disappeared completely. I dragged it into the living room, my arms shaking from the effort. The latches were stiff. When I finally got them open, the smell hit me. Gun oil, canvas, dust, and something else I couldn't name. The scent of a life I'd lived but could barely recognize anymore. On top was my dress uniform, folded with the precision they'd drilled into us at Fort Benning. Beneath it, medals still in their cases. Bronze Star. Purple Heart for the shrapnel I'd taken outside Kandahar. Army Commendation Medal with Valor Device. Campaign ribbons from Iraq, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa. Each one represented months or years of my life. Each one had cost something. I set them aside carefully and kept digging. Photographs. Dozens of them, some in frames, most loose. Me and my unit in front of a Humvee somewhere in Helmand Province. All of us squinting against the sun, trying to look tough for the camera. Me shaking hands with a general whose name I couldn't remember. Me in full combat gear, face streaked with dust and sweat, holding an M4 that felt heavier every year I carried it. And then there were the other photos. The personal ones. My wedding day. Karen in a simple white dress, me in my Class A uniform. Both of us grinning like we knew something the rest of the world didn't. We'd been 23, stupid and in love and convinced we could make it work despite the deployments, despite the long separations, despite everything. We'd been wrong. There was a photo of Jason as a baby, red-faced and screaming in my arms while I stared at the camera with this expression of absolute terror. I'd been on leave, 2 weeks home before shipping out to Iraq. I remembered thinking I'd have time to figure out this whole fatherhood thing when I got back. Another photo, Jason at 4 years old, building a sandcastle at some beach I couldn't remember. Karen had sent it to me while I was overseas. I'd kept it in my wallet for 6 months before the edges got so worn I had to tape it together. Jason at 7, missing his 2 front teeth, holding up a crayon drawing of a soldier. My dad was written at the bottom in Karen's handwriting. He'd made it for Father's Day. I'd been in Afghanistan. Never saw it until 3 months later. Jason at 13, school photo, trying not to smile. That was the year Karen filed for divorce. I didn't have any photos of Jason after that. The custody battle had been brutal. Karen's lawyer painted me as an absent father who cared more about the military than his family. He wasn't wrong. I'd missed Jason's birth because of a training exercise. Missed his first words, first steps, first day of kindergarten. I'd chosen the job over them, again and again, telling myself I was serving my country, protecting my family by extension. But you can't hug a flag. You can't have a catch with patriotic duty. The judge gave Karen full custody. I got supervised visitation every other weekend, which turned into once a month, which turned into nothing after Jason turned 16 and told the court he didn't want to see me anymore. I'd tried reaching out. Letters that came back unopened. Phone calls that went to voicemail. A birthday card when he turned 18. No response. I sent him money for college. His mother sent it back with a note. He doesn't want anything from you. Jason was 24 now. A grown man I wouldn't recognize if I passed him on the street. I put the photos back and pulled out the postcards. God, the postcards. I'd bought them everywhere I'd been stationed. Touristy garbage with pictures of mosques and temples and monuments I'd never had time to actually visit. But I'd bought them anyway, wrote little messages on the back, stuck them in my footlocker with the intention of mailing them someday. The first one showed the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, all those minarets against a sunset sky. On the back, in my handwriting, "This place is incredible. The call to prayer echoes through the whole city. You'd love the architecture. I'll take you here someday. Love, Dad." Never mailed it. Jason was 9 when I wrote that. Was another postcard from Okinawa. "The ocean here is so blue it doesn't look real. Saw dolphins yesterday. Made me think of that documentary we watched about marine life. Do you still want to be a marine biologist? Miss you every day. Dad." Never mailed it. Cairo. The pyramids are even bigger in person. Tour guide said they're over 4,000 years old. Can you believe people built these without modern tools? History is wild. Hope school's going well. Love, Dad. Never mailed it. Oslo. They have these Viking ships in a museum here. Actual ships from 1,000 years ago. Remember when you used to play with those toy boats in the tub? You'd make up stories about sailing to faraway lands. I thought about you the whole time I was there. I'm sorry I wasn't home for your birthday. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Dad. Never mailed it. 53 postcards. 53 broken promises. 53 pieces of evidence that I'd been thinking about my son while simultaneously abandoning him. I'd told myself I'd mail them all at once, along with a real letter explaining everything. Why I'd been gone so much. Why the job mattered. Why I thought I was doing the right thing. But the months turned into years, and the distance between us grew too wide to cross with a stack of postcards and apologies. Now it was too late. Jason was a stranger. Even if I tried to reach out now, what would I say? Sorry I was a terrible father. By the way, I'm dying. I picked up the last postcard, one I didn't remember buying. It showed a sunrise over the desert, brilliant oranges and reds bleeding across sand dunes. No location printed on it, just that image. I turned it over. The back was blank. I'd never written anything on it. I set the postcards aside and reached deeper into the footlocker. More photographs, these ones harder to look at. My old unit. 15 guys who'd become closer than brothers during 3 tours in Afghanistan. We'd bled together, nearly died together, pulled each other through firefights and IED strikes, and long stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of pure terror. Most of them were dead now. I found myself staring at one photo in particular. All of us crammed into the back of a transport truck, exhausted and filthy after a 48-hour op in Kandahar province. I was in the middle, grinning despite the dust caked on my face. Next to me was Max, the kid from Nebraska who never shut up about his girlfriend back home. To my left was Zach, our medic, the guy who'd saved my life twice. Behind us was Sergeant Cherry, our team leader, the toughest man I'd ever known. Max died 6 months after that photo was taken. Rocket attack on our forward operating base. He'd been writing a letter to his girlfriend when the shrapnel tore through the tent. Zach made it home but couldn't adjust. Last I heard, he'd overdosed on pills in a motel outside Tampa. Nobody knew if it was an accident. Cherry ate his pistol 2 years after retirement. His wife found him in the garage. The others, dead, missing, broken in ways that didn't show up on medical records. I was the last one left, and soon I wouldn't be. At the very bottom of the footlocker, wrapped in cloth, I found my mother's rosary. Black wooden beads, worn smooth from decades of prayers. She'd pressed it into my hands before my first deployment, made me swear I'd keep it with me, made me promise I'd pray for protection. God watches over his soldiers, she'd said. You pray to him, and he'll bring you home safe. I'd tried. Those first few months in Iraq, I'd whispered Hail Marys in the back of transport trucks, clutched those beads during mortar attacks, prayed desperately during firefights that left men screaming for medics who couldn't reach them in time. But the prayers started feeling empty, mechanical. How could I believe in a merciful God when I watched good men die for no reason? When children got caught in crossfire? When the only difference between coming home and coming home in a box was dumb luck? I'd stopped praying somewhere around year 2, packed the rosary away, and never looked at it again. Now I held it up to the dim light from the window, watching the beads catch and reflect the gray afternoon. My mother had been so certain, so absolutely convinced that her God was real, that he listened, that he cared. What if she'd been wrong? The thought lodged itself in my brain and wouldn't let go. That night I couldn't sleep. The oxycodone made my thoughts fuzzy but didn't stop them from racing. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind churning through everything I'd seen in that footlocker. All those places, all those cultures. In Afghanistan, I'd watched village elders pray toward Mecca 5 times a day, faces pressed into the dirt, utterly convinced that Allah heard them. In Iraq, I'd seen Shiite Muslims flagellate themselves during Ashura, blood running down their backs in streams, their faith so intense it looked like madness. In Japan, during a training exercise, I'd visited Shinto shrines where people clapped twice before prayer, left offerings of rice and sake to spirits they believed lived in trees and stones and rivers. In Kenya, I'd met tribesmen who swore their ancestors watched over them from the acacia trees, that the dead never truly left. Every place had its own gods, its own truth, and all of them believed absolutely that they were right. What if my mother had just been born in the wrong place? What if the god she'd devoted her life to was no more real than Zeus or Ra, or any of the other deities that humans had worshipped and then forgotten? Or what if they were all real? What if every god humanity had ever imagined was out there somewhere, listening, waiting? What if I'd been praying to the wrong one my entire life? The thought terrified me, thrilled me, made me feel insane. But I was dying anyway. What did I have to lose? I got out of bed, legs unsteady, and stumbled to my laptop. My fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard, another symptom the doctor had warned me about. Fine motor control would go before the end. I started searching. Gods of Mesopotamia, Egyptian pantheon, Hindu deities, Norse mythology, African tribal spirits, Polynesian legends, Aztec gods, Mayan gods, Incan gods, Aboriginal Dreamtime beings, Celtic deities, Slavic gods, Chinese immortals. Hours passed. The list grew longer. Marduk, Ishtar, Ra, Anubis, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Odin, Thor, Freya, Anansi, Tangaroa, Quetzalcoatl, Huitzilopochtli, Kukulkan, Bayami, Lug, Perun, the Jade Emperor. By dawn, I had a document with 147 names, gods who'd commanded empires, gods who'd demanded sacrifices, gods who'd promised salvation and delivered nothing but silence. I printed the list and stared at it. If one of them was real, if any of them were listening, maybe they'd answer. Maybe one would take pity on a dying man who'd spent his life chasing the wrong things. Maybe one would give me what I was really begging for. More time. A second chance. A way to undo all the mistakes I'd made. It was desperate, pathetic. The act of a man losing his mind. But what else did I have? That night, I started praying. I worked through the list methodically, one god per night. I'd kneel on the living room floor, my knees screaming in protest, my balance shaky, light a single candle, and speak the name aloud. Marduk, ancient king of Babylon, if you're listening, I need your help. Then I'd talk. Tell them about my life, the wars, the deaths, the family I'd destroyed, the tumor eating through my brain, the terror of forgetting who I was before the end. I begged for more time, for a chance to make things right with Jason, for anything. Most nights, nothing happened. I'd kneel there until my legs went numb, then crawl into bed and pass out from exhaustion and painkillers. But I kept going. 10 names, 20, 30. The headaches got worse. Some mornings I'd wake up on the bathroom floor with no memory of how I got there. Other times I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, holding a coffee mug, unable to remember what I'd been planning to do with it. The tumor was accelerating. I could feel it. 40 names, 50. I started losing track of time. Whole days would disappear. I'd come to awareness in the middle of the afternoon with no memory of the morning. The oxycodone wasn't helping anymore. I'd doubled the dose without telling anyone. 60 names, 70. My handwriting deteriorated. The list became harder to read. Sometimes I'd say a name twice without realizing it. Other times I'd skip names entirely, my eyes unable to track the lines properly. 80 names. I was dying faster than the doctors had predicted. I could feel it in the way my body was shutting down. The constant nausea, the tremors in my hands, the moments where my vision would fracture into overlapping images. 85 names. I'd stopped eating. Food tasted like ash. Water made me gag. I survived on oxycodone and stubbornness. 88 names. The night I prayed to the 89th god, I could barely read the list anymore. The letters swam and blurred. I had to hold the paper inches from my face, squinting in the candlelight. Azimuth. I'd never heard of it. No mythology textbook mentioned it. I'd found the name in a single obscure academic paper about pre-Bronze Age desert cultures, buried in a footnote. I lit the candle with shaking hands, knelt down, my knees cracked, pain shot up my spine. Azimuth! My voice sounded hollow, weak. Azimuth, if you exist, if you're listening, I'm running out of time. The candle flame flickered, probably just my breath. I know I don't deserve help. I know I've done terrible things. I've killed people. I've abandoned my family. I've wasted every good thing I was ever given. But I don't want to die alone. I don't want to be forgotten. Please, if there's anything you can do. The room tilted. My vision went gray at the edges. Please, I just want... The world collapsed into static. I woke up on the living room floor. My mouth tasted like copper and rot. Every muscle in my body ached. The candle had burned down to nothing but a puddle of cold wax. The clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My arms felt distant, disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Something else. Slow. Raspy. Deliberate. Coming from the corner of the room where the shadows were thickest. My heart kicked against my ribs. Adrenaline flooded through my system, cutting through the fog of painkillers. I managed to turn my head. Two eyes stared back at me from the darkness. Large, yellow, unblinking, not animal eyes, too intelligent, too aware. The shape moved forward, and the faint light from the window revealed it piece by piece. A face, long and narrow, like a skull that had been stretched until it was twice the length it should be. Skin the color of ancient parchment, cracked and weathered. A beard that seemed to writhe and shift, each strand thick and segmented, moving independently like the tentacles of some deep-sea creature. And above its head, barely visible, a small flame flickered. Not fire, exactly. More like the dying embers of something that had once burned brightly. Wings unfolded behind it, leathery and torn, scraping against the ceiling with a sound like dried leaves. It opened its mouth. Thunder cracked outside, so loud the windows rattled in their frames, so loud I felt it in my chest. When it spoke, the voice sounded like stones grinding together, ancient and exhausted and unimaginably sad. "You called, and I heard." For a long moment, neither of us moved. I lay there on the cold floor, every instinct screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something. But my body wouldn't cooperate. The cancer had taken too much. I could barely lift my head. The creature stood perfectly still in the corner, those massive yellow eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. In the faint light from the street lamp outside, I could see more details now. Details that made my rational mind want to shut down completely. Its face was wrong. Too long, too narrow, the proportions all skewed like someone had taken a human skull and stretched it on a rack. The skin had a waxy quality, gray-yellow and papery, covered in hairline cracks that looked like dried riverbeds. Its nose was barely there, just two slits above a lipless mouth. And that beard. God, that beard. What I'd thought were tentacles were worse up close. Each strand was segmented, articulated, moving independently with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. They reminded me of the tube feet on a starfish, or the feeding tendrils of some deep-sea creature I'd seen in a documentary once. They swayed gently, even though there was no breeze in the room. The wings, I'd thought they were bat wings, but they were more like the wings of something long dead. Leathery membrane stretched between elongated finger bones, torn and ragged at the edges, hanging limp against its back. And above its head, that flame. It was barely there. A guttering, flickering thing that seemed on the verge of going out completely. Not fire, exactly. More like the dying glow of embers in a fireplace hours after the logs have burned to ash. It cast almost no light, just a faint orange-red pulse that made the shadows around it seem deeper. The creature took a step forward, and I heard my breath catch in my throat. That's when it spoke again. "Do not be afraid." The voice was still that grinding stone rasp, but softer now. Almost sad? "You prayed. You called my name. I came." I tried to speak. My mouth opened and closed uselessly. Finally, I managed to croak out a single word. "What? What am I?" The creature's mouth didn't move properly when it spoke, like the voice was coming from somewhere else. "I am what you asked for. I am the answer to your prayers." It took another step forward, and I saw its legs for the first time. Too thin, too long, ending in feet that looked more like talons than anything human. It moved with a strange, careful gait, like something that wasn't used to walking anymore. "My name," it said, and as it spoke, thunder rolled outside again. Not as loud this time, but still enough to rattle the windows, "is Azimuth." The name hung in the air between us. I felt it in my chest, in my bones, resonating like a struck bell. "Azimuth," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. The creature's eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened again, something had changed in them. The intensity was still there, but beneath it I saw something else. Something that looked almost like relief. "You know my name," it said quietly. "It has been so long since anyone spoke it aloud." It moved closer, and I realized with a start that it was lowering itself, folding those impossibly long legs until it was sitting cross-legged on my floor, its wings settling around it like a tattered cloak. The flame above its head flickered weakly. Up close, I could see just how frail it looked. The skin hung loose on its frame. Its ribs were visible through its chest, if it even had ribs, Everything about it screamed ancient, exhausted, fading. "You are afraid," it said, and it wasn't a question. I wanted to deny it, but what was the point? I was terrified. "You look like—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Like a demon." The creature's voice held something that might have been amusement. "Yes, I know. That is what you would call me now, in your modern tongue. Demon. Monster. Nightmare." It shifted slightly, and I heard the papery rustle of those wings. "But I am not what you think. I am older than your concept of demons. Older than your hell. I am—" It paused, as if searching for the right words. "I am what remains when everything else has been forgotten." I managed to prop myself up on my elbows. My head was pounding and I could taste blood in my mouth. "What do you want?" "Want?" The creature seemed to consider this. "I want nothing. You called. I answered. That is the way it has always been." "I called a lot of names," I said, my voice stronger now. Anger was cutting through the fear, which was probably stupid, but I was too tired and sick to care. "Who prayed to every god I could find. Why did you answer? Why you?" Azimuth was silent for a long moment. The flame above its head dimmed even further, until it was barely a spark. "Because," it said finally, "your voice was the first I have heard in a very, very long time." The creature, Azimuth, didn't move from that spot. It just sat there, those massive wings folded around it, that weak flame barely glowing above its elongated head. In the dim light, it looked less terrifying now, more pitiful, like something that had been magnificent once and was now just a shadow of itself. "How long?" I asked. My voice was hoarse. I needed water, but I wasn't about to turn my back on this thing to get it. "How long has it been since someone spoke my name with intent?" Azimuth's head tilted slightly, and the movement was unsettling, too fluid, too serpentine. "By your counting, approximately 1,200 years. Perhaps 1,300. Time moves strangely for me now. 1,200 years. The number was so large it felt meaningless. "You've been— what? Waiting? All that time?" "Waiting. Sleeping. Existing." The creature's tentacle beard writhed slowly. "When a god is forgotten, we do not cease to be. We simply fade. Like your flame there." It gestured with one long-fingered hand toward the puddle of wax where my candle had burned out. "We become embers. We wait in the spaces between, neither alive nor dead, hoping that someone, somewhere, will remember." I pulled myself into a sitting position, leaning against the couch. My body protested every movement, but I needed to be less vulnerable. "You're a god." I was. Azimuth's voice held infinite weariness. "I am not certain what I am now." "But you look like—" I gestured vaguely at its form. "You look like something from hell." "Hell is a new concept," Azimuth said. "Your hell, your devil, your demons, these are recent inventions. I predate them by thousands of years." The flame above its head pulsed weakly. "What you see is what I have become. What happens when worship turns to fear, and fear turns to forgetting? I am a shadow of what I was." It leaned forward slightly, and I tensed, but it made no move to come closer. "Do you want to know what I was?" it asked. "Before the forgetting? Before I became this remnant?" I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. Azimuth settled back, and when it began to speak, its voice changed, became deeper, richer, though still tinged with that grinding stone quality. The voice of something remembering better days. 8,000 years ago, by your reckoning, I walked among the first true civilizations. The people who would become the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the ancestors of nations you know from history books. They were learning to farm, to build, to sail. They were pushing out from the river valleys into the deserts and across the seas. The creature's eyes seemed to focus on something I couldn't see, something distant in time and space. "A man found me in a cave," Azimuth continued. "He was lost, dying of thirst, certain he would become bones bleaching in the sand. He stumbled into my dwelling seeking shade, and there he saw me. Not as I am now, but as I was then. What did you look like? I was magnificent. There was no boastfulness in the words, just a statement of fact. I was fire in form. The flame above my head burned brighter than any torch, bright enough to be seen for miles across the desert. My body was not this withered thing you see now. I was massive, powerful, beautiful, in a way that inspired awe rather than terror. My wings could carry me across vast distances. My voice could shake mountains. I tried to imagine it and failed. The pathetic creature sitting on my floor bore no resemblance to the entity it was describing. What happened to him? I asked. The man in the cave? I gave him water, Azimuth said simply. From my body, from the earth beneath my dwelling. I pulled moisture and gave him life. And then I gave him something more valuable. Knowledge. The creature raised one skeletal hand, and I could see the bones clearly through the translucent skin. I taught him to work with wood and stone, how to shape them, join them, create tools and structures that would last. I showed him how to cut trees and bind them together to create vessels that could cross water. I taught him the secrets of the wheel, how a simple circle could transform everything about how humans moved and built and lived. Azimuth's tentacle beard undulated slowly, almost hypnotically. He went back to his people and taught them what I had shown him. They prospered. They built. They spread across the land. And in gratitude, they carved my image in stone and wood. They made offerings. They prayed. What did they pray for? I asked. Guidance, mostly. Safe passage through the desert. Favorable winds at sea. Protection from sandstorms and drowning. I answered when I could. I would manifest in the desert as... The creature paused. You would call it a worm. A great worm that moved through the sand as a fish moves through water. When ships were lost at sea, I would appear and calm the storms, guide them to safety. I thought about what that must have looked like. A massive serpent erupting from desert sands, a leviathan rising from ocean depths. The kind of thing that would inspire legends. They worshipped you as a worm? They worshipped what I showed them, Azimuth said. The form that could traverse both sand and sea, that could burrow through earth and swim through waves. They built temples. They threw offerings into desert pits, great holes that led down to where I dwelt beneath the earth. When they sailed, they carried idols of me, coiled worms carved from stone, and prayed for my protection. The creature's voice grew softer, more wistful. I was the god of travelers and explorers, the deity of those who ventured into the unknown. I guided migrations across continents. I showed them how to read the stars, how to navigate by the sun. Entire peoples moved across the world because I lit the way with my flame. It gestured to the guttering spark above its head. This flame was once a beacon. Lost travelers would see it from miles away, a light in the wilderness guiding them to safety. It never went out. It burned for thousands of years. I looked at the sad little ember hovering above Azimuth's skull. It was hard to imagine it as any kind of beacon. It looked like it might go out any second. What happened? I asked quietly. Azimuth was silent for a long time. When it finally spoke, its voice had aged even more, becoming thin and brittle. What always happens, it said. The world changed. The people changed. Their needs changed. The creature shifted, and I heard the dry whisper of its wings adjusting. Civilizations rose that I had helped create. Babylon, Akkad, Sumer. They grew powerful, sophisticated. They built cities that touched the sky. And with those cities came new gods. Gods of kings and armies, gods of agriculture and commerce. Gods more suited to urban life than to desert wanderings and sea voyages. Azimuth's eyes dimmed slightly. Marduk, it said, and the name sounded like a curse. Enlil, Ishtar. They offered power, victory in battle, abundant harvests. What could I offer? Safe passage through deserts that were becoming trade routes, protection on seas that were increasingly mapped and understood. I was starting to understand. You became obsolete. Obsolete. Azimuth repeated the word like it was tasting something bitter. Yes, that is the modern term for it. I became unnecessary. The creature's tentacle beard coiled and uncoiled slowly. My temples were rededicated to other deities. My idols were melted down or buried. The offering pits were filled with sand and forgotten. My name was struck from tablets and papyrus. Within a few generations, I was legend. Within a few more, I was myth. And eventually, I was nothing. But you said people worshipped you for thousands of years, I protested. Surely. Yes, Azimuth interrupted. Yes, there were holdouts. Nomadic tribes who still remembered. Seafarers who still carried my image for luck. But they grew fewer and fewer. And their prayers grew weaker. The creature looked down at its skeletal hands. You must understand. We are sustained by belief, by worship, by the power of human faith and attention. When that fades, so do we. I began to diminish. My form changed. The magnificent body I once had withered. My flame, my beautiful, eternal flame, began to dim. How far did you fall? I asked. I lingered in the shadows of human civilization for millennia, Azimuth said. I would catch fragments of worship here and there. A sailor throwing an offering overboard. A traveler lost in the wilderness calling for any god to save them. It was enough to keep me from fading entirely, but not enough to restore what I had been. The creature's wings rustled. My last true worshippers were the Norse, the Vikings. They called me by a different name, one of their sea serpents, one of their creatures of the deep. They would pour mead into the ocean and call for safe passage. They remembered me, in a way, though they no longer knew who I truly was. That ended around the year 900 of your common era. 1,000 years ago, I said quietly. Give or take, Azimuth agreed. After that, nothing. Oh, I would catch echoes sometimes. Someone researching ancient mythology, speaking my name in an academic paper. Someone making a movie or a video game featuring a creature inspired by my form, though they never knew the true source. But these were not prayers. These were not beliefs. They were just noise. The creature's voice dropped to barely a whisper. So I retreated. I found a place between places, a pocket of existence where forgotten things go to die slowly, a cavern filled with the remnants of my worship, broken idols, crumbling murals showing me in my glory, the skeletal remains of my last true priest, who died calling my name with no one to hear. I tried to imagine it, this being once worshipped by thousands, now alone in a forgotten cave with nothing but dust and bones for company. I have been there ever since, Azimuth said, waiting for the end, waiting to finally fade completely. My flame has dimmed to almost nothing. I can barely maintain this form. I cannot transform into the worm anymore. I do not have the strength. I can barely manifest in your world at all. The creature looked up at me, and in those massive yellow eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Pain. Loneliness. A depth of sorrow that made my own problems seem insignificant. And then, Azimuth said softly, after 1,200 years of silence, I heard a voice calling my name. Your voice. Weak, desperate, dying, but calling nonetheless. The creature leaned forward slightly. It took everything I had left to come here, to answer your prayer, to manifest in your world for what is likely the last time. The flame above its head flickered dangerously. You called, and I heard. And I came, because even after all this time, even diminished as I am, I remember what it means to answer a prayer. We sat in silence for a while. The enormity of what Azimuth had told me was hard to process. This thing, this being, had been alive for thousands of years, had built civilizations, guided migrations, saved countless lives. And now it was dying just like me, forgotten and alone. I thought about my own life. 23 years in the military, 4 tours overseas, medals and commendations. And what had it gotten me? A rented apartment and a terminal diagnosis, with no one to visit me in the hospital and no one to mourn me when I was gone. We were the same, Azimuth and I. 2 relics from a time when we'd mattered, now obsolete and waiting for the end. "I'm sorry," I said finally. Azimuth's head tilted. "Sorry? That they forgot you. That you ended up like this." The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, a dry, rattling thing. "You are dying," it said. "Your brain is being consumed from the inside. You have weeks, perhaps days, left in this world. And you are apologizing to me?" "Yeah," I said. "I guess I am." Azimuth was quiet for a moment, then it said very softly, "Thank you. It has been a very long time since anyone offered me sympathy." The creature shifted, settling more comfortably on the floor. Its movements were slow, careful, like something that was constantly aware of its own fragility. "Why did you call me?" it asked. "What were you hoping for?" This was it, the moment of truth. I took a shaky breath. "I'm dying, brain cancer, 3 months, maybe less. I've wasted my entire life, dedicated everything to my job and ignored everyone who mattered. My ex-wife hates me, my son won't talk to me, I have no friends, no family, nothing." The words were tumbling out now, faster and faster. I wanted more time. I wanted a second chance to fix everything I broke. I wanted to go back and be the father I should have been, the husband I should have been. I wanted to actually live my life instead of just existing through it. I looked at Azimuth, this pathetic, withered god sitting on my floor. "Can you do that? Can you give me more time?" Azimuth's eyes held mine for a long moment. Then, slowly, the creature shook its head. "No," it said quietly. "I cannot." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd known it was a long shot, had known it was probably impossible, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. "I am too weak," Azimuth continued. "Once, perhaps, when my flame burned bright and my power was at its peak, I could have granted such a request. I could have healed sickness, extended lives, even raised the dead under certain circumstances. But now?" It gestured at itself. "I can barely maintain my own existence. I certainly cannot alter yours." The creature's tentacle beard coiled in what might have been distress. "I am sorry," it said, and it sounded like it meant it. "I heard your prayer and came because I wanted to help. Because after so long in silence, the desire to be useful again, to fulfill my purpose, was overwhelming. But I am not what I was. I cannot give you what you ask." I felt tears burning in my eyes. Of course it couldn't help. Why would anything in my life ever work out? "Then why are you here?" I asked, voice breaking. "Why come at all if you can't do anything?" Azimuth was silent for a long moment. The flame above its head flickered weakly. "Because," it said finally, "perhaps we can help each other in a different way." I wiped my eyes roughly. "What do you mean?" The creature settled back, wings folding more tightly around its frame. "You are dying. I am dying. You are alone. I am alone. You fear being forgotten. I have been forgotten." Azimuth's eyes met mine. "But perhaps we do not have to go through this alone. Perhaps, for whatever time remains, we can keep each other company." I stared at it. "Company?" "I have stories," Azimuth said. "Thousands of years of stories. The things I have seen, the people I have known, the civilizations that rose and fell while I watched. I can share them with you. And you can listen. And for a little while, neither of us will be alone in our dying." The creature leaned forward slightly. "I cannot give you more years," it said softly. "But I can give you what remains. Every night until the end, I will come. I will sit with you. I will tell you stories of times long past and people long dead. I will be here so that when you finally go, you will not go alone." Its voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And in exchange, you will remember me. You will hear my name and my story, and for a little while longer I will matter to someone." I looked at this ancient, dying god sitting on my floor, at the guttering flame above its head, at the resignation and hope warring in those massive yellow eyes. What it was offering wasn't what I'd prayed for, wasn't what I desperately wanted. But maybe it was what I needed. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay. Yes." The flame above Azimuth's head brightened just slightly. Not much, barely noticeable, but there. "Then I will return tomorrow night," it said. "And the night after. And every night until there are no more nights." The creature began to fade, its form becoming translucent, ethereal. "Rest now, Stuart Redford," Azimuth said, its voice already sounding distant. "I will see you when darkness falls again." And then it was gone, and I was alone in my living room with the gray light of dawn creeping through the windows. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel quite so forgotten. Azimuth returned the next night, just as it had promised. I'd spent the day in a fog, unsure if what had happened was real or some hallucination brought on by the tumor and the drugs. I'd checked the living room for evidence, scorch marks, footprints, anything, but found nothing. Just the puddle of hardened wax from my candle and the lingering smell of something I couldn't quite identify. Old stone, maybe. Desert air. When darkness fell, I sat on the couch and waited. My hands shook as I held a glass of water I couldn't drink. The oxycodone made everything feel distant and unreal, but the pain was still there, a constant pressure behind my eyes that was getting worse every day. At 3:17 a.m., the exact same time as before, the temperature in the room dropped. I felt it before I saw it. That same presence, that weight in the air that made my skin prickle. And then Azimuth was simply there, standing in the corner as if it had always been there, as if reality had just forgotten to include it until that moment. The creature looked exactly as it had the night before, skeletal, withered, those massive yellow eyes watching me with an intensity that was somehow comforting now instead of terrifying. The flame above its head flickered weakly, casting almost no light. "You came back," I said, my voice hoarse. "I said I would." Azimuth moved forward with that strange, careful gait and lowered itself to the floor in the same cross-legged position as before. Its wings folded around it like a shroud. "Are you ready to listen?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The creature settled more comfortably, and when it began to speak, its voice took on that same rich storytelling quality from the night before. "Let me tell you," Azimuth said, "about a woman named Ashara. The stories came every night. Azimuth would appear at 3:17 a.m., always in that same corner, always with that same careful manifestation. And then it would sit with me and talk until the first gray light of dawn touched the windows, at which point it would fade away like smoke. The stories were incredible, impossible, beautiful. Ashara was a Phoenician sailor, one of the first women to command her own vessel. She'd been caught in a storm off the coast of what would eventually become Greece, her ship torn apart by waves that towered higher than buildings. She'd clung to wreckage, praying to every god she knew, and Azimuth had answered. It had appeared as a massive serpent beneath the waves, had calmed the water with its presence, had guided her to shore with the light from its flame. "She built a shrine to me on that beach," Azimuth said, and I could hear the smile in its voice. "Just a small thing. Stones stacked in my image, offerings of bread and wine. She would return every year on the anniversary of her rescue and leave gifts. She did this until she was an old woman, gray-haired and bent with age. Even when she could no longer sail, she would make the journey to that beach and pray." "What happened to the shrine?" I asked. "Buried beneath a resort hotel now," Azimuth said. "But for 300 years, sailors knew of it. They would stop there and leave offerings before dangerous voyages. I heard every prayer." The creature's tentacle beard coiled thoughtfully. "She had a good life, Ashara. Married, had children, grandchildren. Died peacefully in her sleep surrounded by family. She never forgot what I did for her." I thought about that. About being remembered with gratitude instead of resentment. About having people who would mourn you when you were gone. Another night, Azimuth told me about a boy named Enkidu who'd gotten lost in the desert during a sandstorm. His entire tribe had been caught in the storm, scattered across miles of dunes. The boy, no more than 7 years old, had wandered for 2 days without water, His lips cracked and bleeding, his skin burned raw by sun and sand. He collapsed at sunset on the second day, Azimuth said, lay there in the sand waiting to die, and as the stars came out, he saw my flame on the horizon. Just a small light, barely visible, but enough. He crawled toward it for hours. Every time he thought he couldn't go any further, there it was, my flame guiding him. Did he make it? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the gentle tone in Azimuth's voice. He reached my temple at dawn. My priests found him at the entrance, unconscious but alive. They cared for him, gave him water and shade. When he woke, he told them about the light that had guided him. He became a priest himself when he grew older, dedicated his entire life to my service. Azimuth's flame pulsed softly. He would light a fire every night on the temple roof, a mirror of my flame, he called it, so that anyone lost in the desert would have two lights to guide them home. His and mine. The stories kept coming, night after night. A Viking warrior named Bjorn, who'd been caught in a storm off the coast of Iceland. A merchant from Akkad, who'd been robbed and left for dead in the wilderness. A slave girl from Egypt who'd escaped her captors and fled into the desert, praying for salvation. A fisherman from a village whose name had been lost to history, whose entire family had drowned when their boat capsized, and who'd wanted to die until Azimuth had shown him that his life still had meaning. Each story was different, but they all had the same core. People in desperate need, calling out to anyone who might listen, and Azimuth answering. Not because it expected worship or sacrifice, but because that was what it did. That was its purpose. "You saved so many people," I said one night, my voice thick with emotion. The tumor was getting worse. I'd started having small seizures, brief moments where my body would lock up and the world would tilt sideways. "You changed lives, built civilizations. Why weren't you remembered?" Azimuth was quiet for a long moment. "Because humans forget," it said finally. "It is not a moral failing. It is simply what happens. Civilizations rise and fall. Languages change. Stories get twisted and distorted until they no longer resemble the truth. New gods replace old ones. It is the way of things." The creature's eyes met mine. "I do not blame them for forgetting. I only mourn what was lost." The weeks passed. I was deteriorating rapidly now. Some mornings I'd wake up and not remember my own name. Other times I'd find myself standing in rooms with no memory of why I'd gone there. The seizures were getting more frequent. My hands shook constantly. I'd lost so much weight that my clothes hung off me like rags. But every night at 3:17 a.m., Azimuth was there. The creature was changing too, I realized. The flame above its head was growing slightly brighter. Not much, it was still barely more than an ember. But there was a definite difference from that first night, and its voice seemed stronger, less brittle. "You're getting better," I said one night. It wasn't a question. Azimuth's tentacle beard coiled in what might have been embarrassment. "Your attention sustains me," it admitted. "Every night you listen to my stories, remember my deeds, speak my name. It feeds me in a way I haven't been fed in centuries. Not enough to restore me to what I was, but enough to keep me from fading entirely. So I'm helping you," I said, "by listening. You are keeping me alive," Azimuth said simply. "For a little while longer, at least. When you go, I will fade again. But these nights, these conversations, they are precious, beyond measure. You have given me more in these few weeks than I have had in 1,000 years." I thought about that. Thought about the strange symmetry of it. This ancient god keeping me company as I died, and my attention keeping it alive in return. We were sustaining each other through our final days. It was beautiful, in a way. Sad and beautiful. One night, as Azimuth told me about a group of nomads who'd been guided across an impossible desert by following its flame, I had an idea. "I want to write this down," I said suddenly. "Your stories. All of them." Azimuth fell silent. The flame above its head flickered. "Why?" it asked. "Because they're incredible. Because they deserve to be remembered. Because—" I struggled to find the right words. My thoughts were getting fuzzy more often now. "Because you deserve to be remembered. Not as some footnote in an academic paper or a monster in a video game. as what you really were, what you really did. The creature stared at me for a long moment. I cannot ask that of you, it said finally. You are dying. You should spend what time remains with your family, making peace. I don't have family, I interrupted. Not really. Not anymore. But I have this. I have your stories. And maybe that's enough. Azimuth's eyes held mine. It would be my honor, it said softly, to have my stories preserved by you. I started writing the next day. It was hard. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold a pen. My thoughts would scatter mid-sentence, and I'd forget what I was trying to say. The headaches were constant now, a vice grip around my skull that no amount of medication could fully ease. But I pushed through. Every night, Azimuth would tell me stories. Every day, I would write them down. Sometimes it took me hours to complete a single page. Other times, the words would flow and I'd manage several pages before exhaustion forced me to stop. I wrote about Ashara the sailor, about Enkidu, the lost boy, about Bjorn the Viking and the slave girl and the fisherman. I wrote about Azimuth's first appearance to that man in the cave 8,000 years ago, about the civilizations it had helped build, the lives it had saved, the purpose it had served. I wrote about what it had been, magnificent, powerful, benevolent, and what it had become. A forgotten deity waiting to die, sustained only by the attention of one dying man who'd called its name in desperation. The pages piled up. My handwriting grew worse, more illegible, but I kept going. 6 weeks after that first night, I had a manuscript, rough, poorly organized, probably full of errors, but complete. The story of Azimuth, from its first manifestation to its slow decline into obscurity. I held the stack of papers with trembling hands and felt tears running down my face. It's done, I whispered that night when Azimuth appeared. Your story. It's done. The creature looked at the manuscript for a long time. The flame above its head was brighter now, not blazing, but no longer in danger of going out. It cast a soft orange glow that made the shadows seem less oppressive. Thank you, Azimuth said, and its voice cracked. Thank you for seeing me, for hearing me, for remembering me. I wanted to say something profound, something meaningful, but my mind was fragmenting. Words were getting harder to find. Instead, I just nodded and held out the manuscript. It's yours, I managed. Your legacy. Something changed in me after finishing the book. Maybe it was the sense of completion. Maybe it was just the tumor finally eating through the last functional parts of my brain. But I found myself thinking about Jason. My son. The boy I'd abandoned for my career. The man I didn't know. I hadn't tried to contact him in years, hadn't dared. What right did I have to insert myself back into his life now? When I was dying? Wouldn't that just be selfish? One last act of taking when I'd already taken so much? But Azimuth's stories had shown me something. They'd shown me people who'd been saved, who'd been given second chances, who'd found meaning in their final moments, people who'd been remembered with love instead of resentment. Was it too late for me to have that? Was it too late to try? Call him, Azimuth said one night, as if reading my thoughts. Call your son. He won't answer, I said. He hasn't answered in 8 years. Perhaps not, Azimuth agreed. But you will never know unless you try. And you have very little time left to try. The creature leaned forward. I have watched civilizations rise and fall. I have seen empires turn to dust. And do you know what I have learned? That the worst pain is not from the things we do, but from the things we fail to do. The words we never speak. The chances we never take. The connections we never attempt to make. Its eyes held mine. Call your son, Stuart. Even if he does not answer. Even if he hangs up. Call him anyway. Tell him what is in your heart. Give him the chance to choose how this ends. I thought about it for the rest of the night after Azimuth faded. Thought about what I would say. How I would explain. Whether Jason would even care that I was dying. The next morning, hands shaking, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I still had memorized after all these years. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then, "Hello?" His voice. Older, deeper than I remembered, but still recognizably his. "Jason," I said, and my voice broke. "It's your father. I need to talk to you." The conversation was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I told him everything. About the cancer, about the prognosis, about how I'd wasted my life and destroyed our family and failed him in every way that mattered. I apologized for the missed birthdays and the broken promises and the years of absence. I told him I didn't expect forgiveness, didn't deserve it, but I wanted him to know that I was sorry, that I'd always loved him, even when I'd been too selfish and stupid to show it. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said, "Why now? Why call now after all these years?" "Because I'm dying," I said, "and because I don't want to die with things left unsaid between us. Because I want you to know that every single day I regret not being there for you. Because I love you, and I'm sorry, and I know that's not enough, but it's all I have left to give." Another long silence. "I'm angry with you," Jason said finally. "I've been angry for so long. You chose your job over me, over Mom, over everything, and I hated you for it." "I know," I whispered. "But..." He took a shaky breath. "But you're still my father, and I don't want you to die alone." The tears came then, hot and fast. "Can I see you?" I asked. "Just once, please." "Yes," Jason said. "Yes, I'll come this weekend." Jason came on Saturday. I'd prepared myself for it to be awkward, painful, full of resentment and unresolved anger. And it was, at first. He stood in my doorway looking uncomfortable. This grown man I barely recognized. He had Karen's eyes and my jawline, and seeing him was like looking at a ghost of who I might have been if I'd made different choices. We sat in my tiny living room and talked. Really talked. For the first time in over a decade. I told him about my deployments, tried to explain the mindset that had made me prioritize the military over everything else. He told me about growing up without a father, about the resentment and confusion and pain of feeling abandoned. I told him about the guilt I'd carried, the postcards I'd never sent, the regret that had eaten at me for years. He told me about the anger he'd held onto, how it had shaped him, how he'd had to work through it in therapy. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There was still hurt there, still anger, still a canyon of lost years that couldn't be bridged in a single afternoon. But it was something. It was real and honest, and more than I'd had in a very long time. "I wrote a book," I told him as he was getting ready to leave. I showed him the manuscript, Asimov's story, all those pages of shaky handwriting. "What is it?" he asked. "Something I need published," I said. "After. Will you help me with that?" He took the manuscript, flipped through a few pages. "What's it about?" "Redemption," I said. "And being remembered. And second chances, even when it seems too late." Jason looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "I'll make sure it gets published. I promise." Before he left, he hugged me. Just once, brief and awkward, but real. "I'm glad you called," he said quietly. "I'm glad we got to do this." "Me too," I whispered. "Me too." I told Asimov about it that night. About the conversation, the reconciliation, the promise of publication. The creature's flame burned brighter than I'd ever seen it. Still not the blazing beacon it had once been, but strong and steady now. "You have done well," Asimov said. "You have made peace. You have created something lasting. You have ensured that both of us will be remembered." "I'm scared," I admitted. "Of what comes next. Of forgetting everything. Of the end." "I know," Asimov said gently. "But you will not face it alone. I will be here until the very end. I promise you that." The creature reached out one skeletal hand, and I took it. Its skin was cool and papery, but the grip was firm. "Thank you," I said. "For everything. For the stories. For the company. For showing me that even forgotten things can still matter." "Thank you," Asimov replied. for reminding me what it means to be needed, to have purpose, to matter to someone. We sat together in comfortable silence as the night wore on. I saw Jason 3 more times before the end. We got coffee once, sat in my apartment and looked through old photos another time. The last visit, I was mostly incoherent, the tumor having taken most of my cognitive function. But he was there, holding my hand, and I knew him even if I couldn't always remember his name. The manuscript was with a publisher. Jason had found someone willing to take a chance on it, convinced them it was worth reading. Azimuth came every night, even when I could no longer speak, could no longer understand the stories. The creature would sit with me in the darkness, that flame burning steadily above its head, and just be there, present, a witness to my final days. I died on a Tuesday morning in early November. Jason was there. So was a hospice nurse whose name I never learned. And though I couldn't see it, I knew Azimuth was there too, invisible but present, watching over me as I slipped away. My last coherent thought was gratitude, for the stories, for the reconciliation, for not dying alone. The book was published 6 months later. The Worm of Forgotten Times, Stories of the Last God, hit shelves with little fanfare and modest expectations. Just another memoir from a dying veteran, another attempt to make sense of a wasted life, but something about it resonated. Maybe it was the honesty of it, the raw admissions of failure alongside the fantastical tales of an ancient deity. Maybe it was the beautiful prose that somehow emerged from those shaky handwritten pages. Maybe it was just the right story at the right time. Whatever the reason, the book found its audience. It started small, independent bookstores, word of mouth, a few positive reviews in literary journals. Then larger publications picked it up. Then it was on bestseller lists. Within a year, it had been translated into 17 languages and sold millions of copies worldwide. People were captivated by Azimuth's story, by the idea of this benevolent deity who'd helped humanity for thousands of years, only to be forgotten and abandoned. By the parallel story of Stuart Redford, the soldier who'd sacrificed everything for duty, only to die alone and forgotten. But more than that, people connected with the themes: redemption, purpose, the fear of being forgotten, the possibility of second chances, even at the end. Scholars began researching. Archaeological expeditions were launched. And incredibly, impossibly, they found evidence. A temple complex in the Mesopotamian desert, buried for millennia, with murals showing a serpentine deity with a flame above its head. Offering pits filled with ancient artifacts, stone carvings of coiled worms, inscriptions that, when translated, referenced a god named Asmoth, or Asmatu, or variations thereof. Viking runestones mentioning a sea serpent that guided ships safely home. Phoenician pottery depicting a flame leading sailors through storms. Fragments of prayers and invocations from a dozen different cultures, all pointing to the same entity. It was real. All of it. The academic papers were published with cautious excitement. Previously unknown deity of Bronze Age cultures identified. Evidence of pan-cultural worship practices in ancient world. The Azimuth cult, tracing a forgotten religion across civilizations. And with the academic interest came something else. Something unexpected. People started praying to Azimuth again. Not in the organized, ritualistic way of ancient cultures, but in small, personal ways. A hiker lost in the wilderness, remembering the stories from the book, whispering a prayer for guidance. A sailor caught in a storm, calling out to the Worm of Forgotten Times for safe passage. A traveler far from home, asking for a light to guide them. And impossibly, incredibly, they reported that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they got an answer. A faint light on the horizon when they were lost. An unexpected calm in troubled waters. A sense of presence, of being watched over, of not being alone. Social media filled with stories. Azimuth helped became a minor phenomenon. People shared experiences of being lost and finding their way, of being in danger and somehow escaping, of praying in desperation and receiving unexpected aid. Most dismissed it as coincidence or wishful thinking. But the stories kept coming, and in caves and deserts and lonely places around the world, people began leaving offerings. Not elaborate sacrifices, just simple gifts. Water poured into sand, bread left on stones, small flames lit in the darkness. A shrine appeared on a beach in Greece, built by a sailor who'd been caught in a storm and swore she'd seen a light guiding her to shore. Another appeared in Iceland, erected by hikers who'd been lost in a blizzard and followed what they described as a small, steady flame to safety. More shrines followed, in deserts and mountains and by the sea. Small, humble things, just stones stacked in memory of a forgotten god who'd been remembered again. In a space between spaces, in a cavern that existed outside of normal reality, Azimuth stirred. The flame above its head, dim and guttering for so long, began to grow. Slowly at first, then faster. The weak ember became a candle flame. The candle flame became a torch. The torch became a beacon. The creature's withered form began to fill out. Strength returned to skeletal limbs. The wings, torn and ragged for centuries, began to regenerate. The tentacle beard writhed with renewed vigor. Azimuth could feel them. Each prayer, each offering, each person who spoke its name with reverence or hope or simple acknowledgement. The collective weight of belief, small as it was compared to ancient times, was enough. Enough to restore, enough to heal, enough to give it purpose again. The god stood, truly stood for the first time in over a millennium, and stretched wings that were whole and strong. The flame above its head blazed brilliantly, casting light through the cavern that had been its tomb. And Azimuth smiled, if such a creature could be said to smile. Stuart Redford had given it the greatest gift possible. Not worship, not sacrifice, not even belief, really. He'd given it remembrance. He'd given it story. He'd given it a chance to matter again. And in return, Azimuth had given Stuart the same thing. A reason to matter in his final days. A purpose beyond regret. A legacy that would outlive his broken body and fractured mind. They had saved each other in the end. The dying soldier and the forgotten god. Azimuth could feel the prayers now. A woman lost in the Australian outback, calling for guidance. A child separated from his parents in a crowded market in Cairo, frightened and alone. A fisherman caught in a typhoon off the coast of Japan, desperately seeking any hope of survival. The god's form began to shift, to change, taking on its ancient shape, the great worm that could traverse sand and sea, that could calm storms and light the way for the lost. For the first time in 1,200 years, Azimuth had work to do. Jason Redford stood at his father's grave on a cold December morning, 3 years after Stuart's death. The book had made him wealthy. Stuart's estate had gone to him, and the royalties were substantial. But more than that, it had given him something he'd never expected. Closure. Understanding. A sense of who his father had really been beneath the uniform and the failure. He'd read the manuscript dozens of times now, knew the stories by heart. And sometimes, when he was alone, he would whisper a prayer to Azimuth, not asking for anything, just acknowledging, remembering, keeping the flame alive. A light snow was beginning to fall. Jason pulled his coat tighter and looked at the simple headstone. Stuart Redford, loving father. He died remembered. Below it, carved at Jason's request, was a simple image, a coiled worm with a flame above it. "I miss you, Dad," Jason said quietly. "I wish we'd had more time, but I'm grateful for what we did have. And I'm grateful you wrote the book. It helped me understand. It helped a lot of people understand." He placed a small offering at the base of the grave, a candle in a glass jar protected from the wind. He lit it and watched the flame dance. "Your story mattered," Jason continued. "You mattered. And so did he, Azimuth, the worm of forgotten times. You made sure neither of you would be forgotten." The candle flame flickered, then burned steady and bright. Jason stood there for a while longer, watching the light, thinking about his father and ancient gods, and the strange, beautiful way that broken things could sometimes heal each other. Then he turned and walked away through the falling snow, leaving the flame burning steadily in the growing darkness. And somewhere, in a place between places, an ancient god felt that small flame join all the others. Thousands of tiny lights around the world, each one a prayer, an offering, a remembrance. Azimuth's flame burned brighter. The worm of forgotten times was forgotten no more.